Why'd the chicken cross the road?
The other side.
Actually, to prove to the possum, and the raccoon, and the squirrel it could be done. So, please? Yeah. Yeah, what amazes me is a couple of years ago I heard on a radio station some lady called up and said they need to move those signs so the deer will cross someplace else. It's like, okay. As we get into our message today, let's dive into our scriptures. We pick up in Exodus chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, and she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Okay, so as we get into things today, I'm sure you're probably glad this is not part 7 of our series that we were going through. But so as we get into this, God is going to call Moses to become a great leader one day. We're all basically familiar with the story. That at some point later on down the road, God is going to reach out not reach out, but he's going to call Moses and tell him that he's got a job for him. But first, he's got to prepare him to become that leader. Okay? And as we're looking through the text today, what we're looking at is, if you would, Moses is trained to be a strong leader from the time he is old enough to begin learning until he's 40 years old. All right? So what has taken place is Moses was born into a slave family, and through the process that took place, Moses becomes Egyptian royalty. That's quite a step up from slave to royalty into the house of Pharaoh. And as a result, Moses was going to receive the best education that Egypt had to offer. As a matter of fact, at this time, Egypt was considered to be the focal point of education in the world. As a matter of fact, one of the great library of Alexandria is still considered a great work today, because that is where all of the knowledge of the known world at the time was gathered together. And even in later times, that library continued to exist. And also because of the fact that he has been brought into the royal family, Moses would be trained to lead in the military since he was a member of the royal household. And so he's receiving the best education possible, and he's being trained as a strong leader. Someone who would be trained by the best leaders in Egypt and would have become a general in the army because of the royal bloodline. And so he's going through this training. And at 40 years of age, if you would, God isn't finished preparing Moses for the assignment he has for him. You know, you would think if God's going to call Moses to lead the people out of Egypt, to lead his children out of Egypt, that by 40 years of being trained in the military, having the best education possible, he would be ready. You would think he's ready to go. But no, 40 years, God's not finished preparing him yet. But in order to finish preparing him, he has to get him out of Egypt. And so as we pick up at verse 11, we find one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. So at some point, as Moses was growing up, he was told by someone he was a Hebrew and not an Egyptian. He's learned it somehow. Now, the movie Ten Commandments only speculates about how it could happen. Okay, we don't know how it happened exactly. All we know is that somewhere along the line, he knows that he's Hebrew. And he finds himself in this situation where he defends one of his own people and kills an Egyptian. And now, if you would, Moses is considered a traitor, and Pharaoh wants him dead. And so he flees and leaves Egypt. My pages stick. And phase 2 of his training is complete. Phase 1 was getting trained as a leader. Phase 2 is to get him out of Egypt. And that has now been accomplished. But in accomplishing that, Moses has learned something very important. If you would, Moses now knows what it is like to fall from grace and have the most powerful ruler in the world at the time want him dead. So Moses knows what it's like to be on top of the world, and now he knows what it's like to be at the bottom of the world with someone seeking to kill him. So he's gone from one extreme to the next. He's on the roller coaster ride. And now it's time for the next phase of his training. And so we pick up in verse 16. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered the flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "And where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." Okay. So Moses arrives in Midian stripped of all status and position. Yeah, he's still wearing the Egyptian clothes. The people of Midian really don't know about his past at this point in time. But for all practical purposes, he's got no status. He's got no position. He essentially has gone from a prince of Egypt to a nobody. He's hungry and dependent on the goodwill of Reuel, or Jethro as he is later called. So Moses is now beginning the next phase of his training. He has crossed the desert. Not sure how many days it took him to cross the desert on foot, but it was probably several days. So you can kind of imagine that he's sunburnt, his skin is dried and parched, and he's probably not looking like he's all that healthy at this point in time, as Reuel brings him into his household and gives him his daughter in marriage. Moses has showed up in Midian. He knows how to be a prince and general. He knows how to take charge. He did that with the shepherds who came and drove Reuel's daughters away from the well. He knows what it's like to command and have his subjects go where he sends them. He knows what it's like to be the guy at the top of the list. But now, if you would, Moses must learn to tenderly shepherd sheep and goats. Try and imagine if you were to go back to the book of Genesis when the family of Joseph first arrived in Egypt. One of the things that Joseph told them was that shepherds are detestable to Egyptians. So Moses has gone not only from being at the top of the list, now he's becoming a shepherd, which is detestable to the household he grew up in. Big difference from what he has known for 40 years. But what is taking place is Moses must learn to lead by example. Not by commanding his subjects to go where he sends them, but instead, if you would, follow him as he takes the lead and goes ahead of them. And so for another 40 years, Moses is still in training, because that's part of how a shepherd at that point in time, and still in the Middle East, that's how the shepherd operates. He trains his sheep, learn to follow him and trust him. And so all he has to do is speak to his sheep, and when he speaks to his sheep, they follow him wherever he goes. That's the reason that Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice, and they follow me." It is that aspect of recognition of leadership, something not from the standpoint of the person gives a command, but the person can be trusted. And so they follow. And so for another 40 years, that's what Moses is in the process of learning. How to tenderly, lovingly lead rather than commanding. And part of that learning to tenderly lead includes learning to care for the flock. Learning to tend to the needs of the flock. When one of the sheep or goats is injured, tending to the injury. When it's sick, providing the necessary medications. And so for 40 years, Moses is learning this new facet of leadership. And then one day, so we pick up in verse 1 of chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? So, God is sending Moses back to Egypt. God has been preparing Moses for this for 80 years. First, learning to take command and be a general, and then learning to be a shepherd. For 80 years, Moses has been in training, and what does Moses do? if you would. Moses immediately begins making excuses as to why God has the wrong person. Go to Egypt. Who? Me? You got to be talking to somebody else back here. Me? Who am I? Who am I? Why me? Well, I'm not qualified. I can't do it. Again and again he argues with God, and you can sense the tension building as God becomes more and more angry with him. Even after God tells him that he will have to act and that Moses isn't going to be doing it alone, Moses continues to make excuses, one after the other, as to why he can't do it. I just can't do it, God. I can't do this. I'm not the guy. You're talking to the wrong one. You realize Moses is essentially telling God he doesn't know what he's doing. Moses is essentially telling God he's clueless. And finally, Moses is starting to get the idea God's not taking no for an answer. And he says, okay, let's say I go. What if no one will listen to me? So now we're going now he's gotten to the point where he's finally realized God is not going to accept him saying, I'm not the guy. So it's like, okay, well, let's say I'm the guy that you're going to send me. Okay, let's say I go. Now he's going to try and make the excuse of, what about them? What if they don't listen to me? What if they say, oh, you're crazy. God never spoke to you. Of course, he's got in the back of his mind, there's probably people there that remember why he left Egypt. He's probably got in the back of his mind, as soon as I cross into Egypt, there's a price on my head. And so he's still looking for a way out of this. What if they won't listen to me? You know what my past is like, God. You know they want me dead in Egypt. So why would they listen to me? What if they don't listen? And so in the time of shifting the argument, in Exodus 4, verse 1, we pick up, it says, Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what's that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Now understand, at that point in time, a shepherd's staff was his lifeblood, so to speak. It was his defense, his security. He was dependent on having that staff for the sheep. He used it to help direct things around. If the sheep were attacked, he used it as a weapon. If he was attacked, he used it as a weapon. It was his lifeblood. It was essential. He would never let go of it while awake, and he would even sleep with it. Moses had no idea what God was about to do, and telling Moses to throw it on the ground was paramount to saying, let go of what you have become. Let go of everything as you know it. Let go of your security, let go of your safety, let go of everything. And so Moses throws it on the ground, and it becomes a snake. Now I'm guessing it probably became a poisonous snake since Moses began to run from it. I don't know that a shepherd would necessarily run from a non-poisonous snake. But I can definitely see a shepherd hightailing it as soon as it turns into one that was poisonous, possibly a cobra or an adder of some type, which is common in that area. And keep in mind, what if Moses had hung on to the staff and God would have changed it into a snake? What would have happened? He'd have been bit. In order to not be bit, God had to make sure Moses threw the staff on the ground. And basically, if you would, Moses was in a sense running from everything that he had become when he ran from the snake. Think about that. He was running from everything that he had become when he ran from the snake. And then God tells him to reach out and pick it up by the tail. I don't know about you, but I don't know that I would be all that prepared to reach out and pick up any snake by the tail. Although I'm told supposedly that poisonous snakes, if you pick them up by the tail, they have a hard time striking. So I don't intend to find out. You know, I'll believe you, but I don't trust you, type of thing. And so while God was telling Moses this would be a sign for the people, it was also a sign for Moses. It wasn't just for the people. God was trying to impress upon him something very important. You see, to Moses, it was simply a staff that he used, and it was his power that made it an effective weapon when he needed it. Or a staff of discipline for wandering sheep and goats, or a tool for many other uses, just as it would be for any other shepherd. As long as he had it in his hand and he had control of it, it's whatever he wanted it to be. It was just a staff. But, if you would, the staff was symbolic of the completion of the necessary training before Moses was called to lead God's people out of Egypt, even though there was more for him to learn. It was symbolic of the fact that Moses had reached the point now where God was ready to send him. And part of his being sent was going to include more training along the way. But he had received what was necessary for him to be ready to be sent back to Egypt. Moses threw an ordinary shepherd's staff on the ground. But by telling Moses to throw it on the ground, he was telling Moses to give him the staff. And when he did, if you would, it became more than just a shepherd's staff. After all of the training and education he had received in Egypt, combined with all of the training and experience he has gained as a shepherd, when he picked it up, as God told him to do, God gave it back to him as more than a staff. You see, if you would, it represented God changing the ordinary into extraordinary, which is what God was in the process of doing with Moses. As far as Moses was concerned, he was just an ordinary guy. He had been at the top of the list. He had been amongst the royalty of Egypt, and now he has been plummeted to the very bottom of being just an ordinary, everyday guy with no expectations other than being just a shepherd. Just a shepherd with a staff. Moses had reached the point where he considered himself of little use to anyone except to be among the sheep, which was detestable to the Egyptians. But once he placed all of the training he had received into God's hands, he became not only more than what he ever imagined he could be. If you would, Moses became what God had prepared him for, the great leader he is known as. Moses had to go through a lot before God was finished preparing him to be sent to Egypt, including Pharaoh wanting him dead. And when the time came, Moses balked at the idea and resisted. He didn't see God's hand at work in his life preparing him for that specific point in time. He just simply saw a series of events that had knocked him from the top to the bottom. A series of events that had severely humbled him to the point that he considered himself to be amongst the lowest of people. He was known, according to Scriptures, as being the humblest of men. Even though he was going to be a great leader, and even while he was that great leader who led the Israelites out of Egypt, he still was considered to be the humblest of men. He never took that leadership to heart. He never tried to take the position of, look at me, I'm the one who's leading here. He was always humble. But in order to get him to become what God wanted him to be at this point in time, if you would, God made Moses let go of how he perceived himself and allow himself to be used for what God had prepared him for. Moses had to let go of everything as he understood it. He had to let go of how he saw himself and let God begin to show him what he was prepared to make him into. Let God begin to show him what all of that training was about. Let him begin to understand that all of the ups and downs that he has been through, everything that he's had to face, was for the purpose of preparing him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And it is important to understand that even after God called him, after Moses has been a work in progress for 80 years and has been called to lead the people out of Egypt, even now, if you would, Moses was still a work in progress. Even though God was sending him, the work had not stopped. He was still a work in progress. Everything that has been happening in each of our lives is part of God preparing us for use in His kingdom and His way. You see, if you would, we have all been a work in progress, being prepared to bring God glory from the moment we were born into this world. Each of us has been called to build the kingdom with all of the talents and skills God has blessed us with and developed in us over the years. And even though we will still be a work in progress for as long as God gives us breath, if you would, that does not mean we are not ready to be called into service. Are you prepared to answer His call? Or do you find yourself arguing with Him like Moses? Oh, I'm not the person. I can't handle that. I can't do that. You need to pick someone else. What staff are you holding on to? What excuses have you made as to why God can't use all of the training He's given you to use in His kingdom? Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1, "For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." So I ask again, what staff is in your hand? What is it that you're clinging to? What excuses have you been making? What is keeping you from allowing God to use you to the fullest in His kingdom? We all make excuses. We all find reasons as to why we can't when God calls. But we need to understand, if you would, God wants us to put our total being in His hands and allow Him to use all that He has given us for His glory. We've been a work in progress. We will still be a work in progress. We will be a work in progress until the day we die. But that doesn't mean that God is not intending on using us in the meantime. What do you need to let go of that's keeping you from being used of God the way He wants to use you? What is it that is getting in the way? What is it that's got you convinced you're not ready? Or that you can't do what it is He's laying in front of you? Will you let go of it? Will you throw it on the ground and let Him give it back to you as more than what it was before? Will you turn yourself over to Him and let Him fashion you into what He has in store for you? Will you let Him lead? And will you follow? Is there something you need to let go of today? Is there something that's been getting in the way? Would you let go of it? Would you give it to God and let Him have control?